digital humanities research. Eugenia Kelbert is lecturer and research associate of Chair for Slavic Languages and Cultures at the University of Passau. She's completing her PhD in comparative literature at Yale University, and her dissertation focuses on authors who write in second language, literary bilingualism, and translation theory. So you can see one, I would say, perfect combination for digital humanities. One expert in computer sciences and an expert in humanities. So the floor is yours.
Kao što je Eugenia rekla, znači mi ćemo se međusobno prebacujemo i sad ja vas pozdravljam na domaćem jeziku. Bilo bi još luđe da bih ja pričao na srpskom, ona na engleskom, kada ćemo oboje da pričamo na engleskom. Sad imate neki mentalni kontinuitet. I ovo predavanje, znači, u suštini je konekcija, okay, I switch in English. This presentation is a gap between two important DH aspects. So digital humanities and I can just say it's an augmentation of humanities research and kind of giving them presence in a modern technology, same as mathematics, geophysics, any other aspects that are computer server supporting augmenting research. What Eugenia presented is basically using tools to present and give better access to literature or humanities in general, basically, because I think you can get much wider pictures of this example, great example. We have the same thing, but however we have also another important part which I think will be bigger focus here, and it is how to use technology in a research. So step backward and like in the research. In that case, it will be more challenging, but I think Eugenia will help to make it as close as possible before and prepare it for my part. Okay, so Eugenia can start. Yeah.
Okay, good. So the project that we're working on is called Bookwick, and usually have to explain why it's called Bookwick, but I guess here it must be obvious.
Well, it's not a popular word. Bookwick, yeah, it's bukva, tree, so it's a...
But in Russian, book also means letter. So this is us, and this is some of the people we're working with. Some of them are...
Lazar, actually, colleague, is over there, so we'll just ask him for a short introduction of something else. Yeah.
And this is a digital system, a tool, basically, that has as its goal to allow researchers like myself, for example, who are not computer scientists, but who are interested in applying quantitative methods to literature analysis, to be able to do that. And for us, the solution is a collaboration. Hopefully, this tool will soon be finished and made available to other researchers also, so they would not actually need collaboration that well. In this talk, so we'll be talking very briefly, introducing digital humanities and especially our particular niche within that more general framework, which Sasha already addressed a little bit. So as opposed to digitizing texts as such and presenting them, we're more focused on trying to get inside the text, see what we can actually count inside the text about what stylistic features are quantified. Some examples of results we got in our work on Nabokov. We're also working with other bilingual writers, but Nabokov would be an example. And a scientific introduction to research in humanities and to Bookwick. And the last part will be one part of our project, which is using networks, network analysis for literature analysis. We call it Society of Words.
Sasha, shall I zoom? Nothing can be seen.
Yeah. During Nabokov, born 1899 and 1877. Lalita is probably his most famous text, but I probably most of you know he wrote in both languages, in English and in Russian, and he wrote a lot of novels in both languages, and self-translated Lalita, for example, or Speak Memory, his autobiography, into Russian, and in case of Speak Memory, then back into English again. So he's a very good case of a bilingual writer, we can have text in Russian and English and compare them, which is what we're doing. So, but before we proceed with some results, just a question which a lot of people whose background isn't in literary analysis ask is why use this in the tool? I come from Russia. We usually the quotation that comes to mind in this context is in a play by Pushkin. One character challenges Mozart that he for trying to actually no, it wasn't the other. Mozart challenges the other character for measuring harmony with algebra. So why measure harmony with algebra? You have a beautiful literary text. You can appreciate it. You can write about it. What can digital methods actually give you with that? And we think they can do quite a lot, but the mistake here would be to try to use quantitative methods to supplement qualitative methods, to supplement actual analysis. What we're trying to do is, rather than to supplement, to complement it. So we're using quantitative methods to pinpoint parts of the text or aspects of the text that we can then, as literary scholars, close read and try to understand better using those tools.
It's like a dialogue between quantitative and qualitative world. So you're just supporting each other and helping each other to get further with your research.
So we call this qualitative augmented quantitative analysis. And the idea is basically, yes, you go between the two, and each helps the other. And the focus of this is essentially the goal is stylistic comparison, trying to compare to analyze features of style in quantitative way, and this is called similarity. And another, due to the nature of my own project, which is on bilingualism, one of our important questions from the very outset was how to compare text across languages, not just try to analyze using quantitative methods, but also how do you actually compare a Russian text or an English text or a French text, even though each language of course has its own linguistic system. And the way we try to approach it mostly is to compare with reference to a corpus, the balanced corpus first, and then you compare the deviations from the corpus across the languages. Yes, so one thing that has to be said is that we have to rely on state-of-the-art techniques, which basically means that, for example, if we're doing part-of-speech tagging, which is one thing that we're integrated in our tool, say 90% plus accuracy is very, very good. So any number that the system gives us has to be taken with a certain feature solved, because it does mean that there will be mistakes in the system itself. However, of course, if the same proportion of mistakes affects all the results, then hopefully when you compare them, it should be leveled out. In our case, so I guess one of the more original aspects of our particular research is because we're collaborating, and Sasha is a computer scientist and I'm a literary scholar, we are in a position to develop our own tool. So we're developing our own system from scratch, which I'm going to present in a second. Yes, actually I've extended most of these things already. So we're trying to build a stylistic profile, essentially. So relying on whatever is available in the technology that's out there already, we're trying to quantify features of style. And as a result, hopefully to have a kind of multi-dimensional set of parameters that allows to compare. And when you're dealing with cross-lingual comparison, two things you have to bear in mind. Two things. So you can compare directly, but again, for most aspects of the style, this will not be reliable, because English text and Russian text are built on very different principles. But you cannot. So, but some things you can compare directly, or you can compare indirectly, which means with the relative corpus. So we use the Brown corpus for English, and the Russian national corpus for Russian, and another corpus for French. All right. And one more. So this can be used. This kind of systems can be used within even very different areas. One of them is translation. So one of them is bilingualism research, and that is translation, self-translation. Questions like, does Nabokov write differently in Russian or in English? Is his Russian or English style consistent throughout his novels? Is there such a thing as translated texts? So for example, if we take the old texts that have been translated by Nabokov versus texts that were written originally in that language, will we find any differences consistent across the groups? What about translated style? What about if we compare the text, say into Russian, which are translated not by Nabokov, will they have different different styles, and so on and so forth. Are these results generalizable? So is it just Nabokov or other writers as well? So in this particular project, as I said, we're talking about different writers, but for Nabokov specifically, we chose Lolita as our close study text on one hand. So some things that are impossible to do on a large scale, we just look at Lolita, especially with networks. And another even smaller text is Nabokov's Mademoiselle O. It's a short story, and it's very interesting specifically because we have 5 versions of this text, and it is very, very short. So you can actually zoom in the text very easily. And it's the only short story that Nabokov wrote in French, not in English or Russian, but in French. So he wrote this story in French, translated it into English with somebody's help, rewrote it again for his English autobiography, translated it into Russian, then retranslated again from Russian back into English for the second version of his autobiography, and then we'll have another translation by Adam Tyrwell, just a third-party translator. And we also have a large-scale comparison of Popperov texts and a study of self-translation versus rewriting. Say, some text he translated himself, and the question is how much there is translation, how much is rewriting. Just a very, very brief few examples. So for example, say we take the story of Mademoiselle O, and this is a way to illustrate the procedure basically, or one example of procedure. So we take the story, we run it through our system, and for example, one thing we get is the most common vocabulary, which is pretty common. A lot of systems do that. So does ours. Ours is a little bit more advanced in that it's also just giving you the words. This is the most common frequent word, second most frequent word. It gives us lemmas. So say in Russian, or indeed in Serbian, you have cases. So each word can have 7 different, or however many in different languages, 6 Russian different forms. The system recognizes that it's all one word, so you have lemmas. So for example, we look and we see that the word black, in Russian, is pretty common. It's especially common in the list. After the more common words, suddenly we see black, it's pretty high. So we zoom in. So we have our quantitative method that showed us that this is something interesting here. Let's look at it. We zoom in and we see these are examples from the story. So in French we have different examples of blackness. Then English, a short story, biography in Russian, and in the other translation. And starting with this, we can start looking more closely into the text, and some things we find, for example, how he's writing. So for example, we see that blackness, there is a lot of blackness in the French story, a lot of examples. It's 11, exact number. And then in Russian again, but not in English. So twice less in English. For some reason it's less important in English, it seems. Even though this English text is actually more yes. So for example, this text comes later. So somehow it seems to either have taken them away, these references, or use the early text. We see that the symbolism of blackness develops from one text to the other. So in the French you have just noir, noir, noir. In the English again, less, but and in Russian it develops more of a symbolism. So I'm trying to be faster, which is why I'm not sure what to leave out. But you see that in Russian the blackness is transferred to other words in the vicinity. So it's not anymore black-rimmed pince, for example, but it's pince в черной оправе, and then чеховское pince with черной ободками, окружала черными ободками 2 пушные глаза. So it's not anymore the pince cell that's black, or it matters not as much, it's not as direct, but it's good to know all the time in the world. But as an example of a close reading inspired by analysis. Another thing, if you look at the vocabulary, for example, so one was to look, does number of words that are that occur in a novel, in a book, but not occur in the brown corpus, and the quantity of how many words, how many times they occur. And what we see is that this little dot here is the vocal. So in English, compared to some other texts, compared to Eugenia, Brodsky, he uses much more, 20% more words only once. So rare more exotic words. And in Russian, again, compared to the corpus, this is not the case. The vocal here is purple. He's still on top of the list, but the difference is much less significant. I guess maybe you can show that the graph.
Okay. Yes. So since this is like everything in vivo, we have a chance to show in real results of our research. So this is basically book system. I will talk a bit later more about that. But here we have a concrete results. Okay.
Another example. So this is based on part speech tagging. Okay.
So this is again summarization of all our like parsing, analyzing books. This is the ultimate result, and on the top of that we can do visual researches. What we did basically that we created a graph with all parallel comparative things that you can see here. So this is pretty much you can say.
Okay, well this is a very just a kind of general overview of the larger project, because this doesn't only have the moment, it has the English works by Samuel Beckett and by Amanda and by Nabokov. So 3 different writers, different biographies, but all of them writing in 4 languages. And separated, so the top group, say by Beckett, these are novels that were written in French but translated into English, novels that he wrote in English, but Daddy, novels that he wrote in English, translated from French, translated by somebody else from French, and then Nabokov written in English and translated from the Russian.
And just like before she continues, so I don't know if all of you know what is part of speech tagging, but basically the idea is that you go through the book, textual book that is like a TXT file or textual file, analyze it and find each word, is it like a verb, noun, adjective, etc. So you have quite clear idea what each word belongs to. And tags basically are verb, etc. So here, having all those books together, we have a very big graph.
It's not the French.
Yes, that's right. You're right. It's not. So basically, we have all those interesting things with the corpus on the top. This is like a referential system. We have all of them visualized here, so you can see some.
The proportion of nouns, the proportion of prepositions, of determiners, of verbs in the past tense, verbs, punctuation, adjectives, and so on.
And you see that, but it's not ultra good because we don't have idea. However, actually, what is actually interesting for us, let's see how they deviate from corpus. Like, is there any shift between interesting thing and like which is corpus in this case, and the rest of our research body? So the Eugenia will show that, and I will just enable it here. So when I click here, suddenly big processing is done, and our
so now it's all compared to the corpus in English.
As you can see here.
So it's not just anymore who has more nouns versus less, but who has more than the corpus than they have, like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and they're
So
more,
what do you want
more less. And you see, there's a lot of analysis still needed here, but you see that some things are already visible. For example, Beckett writes in French, the text is self-translated into English. They also have quite a few less nouns, fewer nouns than the corpus. And Gary, on the other hand, sorry, the book, very in the same category mostly. In the book says here, he constantly has many more nouns in the corpus. And there's some other things that doesn't work okay for me. Say again, Beckett in French translated into English has fewer adjectives in the corpus. Pretty much everybody else, with two exceptions, this is one novel by Rudan, one novel by everybody else seems to have more adjectives. And so on.
And just like more information, like what it could mean. what it could mean if you have more adjectives. Basically, if you're trying to write in a second language, you are lacking expression of your mother tongue language. So you're trying to compensate with more elaborative use of adjectives or adverbs, trying to compensate with using more than one adjective, trying to map exact parallel. So this is kind of getting much more like now in a stylistic or expression of language translation, etc.
Yeah, and in this particular list, for example, Beckett is the only one of these authors for whom English is his native language. So maybe that's partly why he differs from the other ones. Okay, maybe just let's move on. And do you want to?
Okay, we have short time now. I will just say, like, no matter what you're doing, I mean, it's not just like in our work, but basically it's quite common in humanities. You can have some idea, hypothesis, and then you're kind of trying to dig out claims to prove it. And scientifically, it's the wrong approach, because then of course you can basically claim if you avoid something, anything that is against your claim. So scientifically, more like science in English, which means like mathematics, etc. You would try to make hypotheses and then see in overall whole spectrum what is correct. And with our tool, we are trying to do a systematic approach to the system. So you can see here as an example, which I will not have that much time to show. For example, how it could look like. For example, you have like Nabokov in English. There are many different novels here. You all of them put here and analyze each of them. And then analysis is interesting here because you get a plain book, you split it into the words, after splitting into the words, you're doing part of speech analysis, what is verb, etc. Doing that, you have to remap because English, German actually guys didn't agree. Okay, let's have the same terminology, same grammar of part of speech, so we have to map it. And so on and so on. And then we're doing like an analysis, distribution, etc. And we starting getting results. So this is a kind of visual procedure of our research, but it's not just visual, it is a real experiment. So later, if you want to repeat your research, you have clear reproducibility, which is very important in science, that someone else can say, hey, you did something wrong, and we can discuss on methodology of our research. I will go back out of that, and I will just conclude with something. This is visual how we do it. Lolita, take Lolita, and parse. But then we will just switch. This is architecture what we are doing. Mind. This is what you just saw. So I will just switch nicely to something that could be more interesting for you, like a visually interesting. Society of words. So idea is here, let's imagine that words in novel are not just like a sequence of words in a sentence in a paragraph into chapter, chapters into final novel. But I can imagine there are some relationship with them. Same as between us, we know each other, so they are like with the reason next to each other, they're repeated in the same correlation with other words. So like if I use two words together, like in a great example of Anna when Vronsky is his chick is
This is told by Vladimir Alexandrov's book. In Anna Karenina, there are two instances where Vronsky's jaw is trembling. There are different words in Russian, but that image is the same. And once it is when he's for the first time sleeping with Anna, and he's kind of looking at her from above. And another time is when his horse dies. So then Alexandrov makes connection between those two unrelated phrases. And says, well, if there are rare occurrences of this image and they only occur twice, then you can say that there is a symbolic similarity between his affair with Anna and his responsibility for the death of his horse.
yes.
So similarly, so this part of the project is basically the aim is to find locate this kind of patterns, rare words that occur together, not very often. Can this mean something for us? Or words that occur together in the same sentence very often. They don't necessarily have to mean the same, apply to the same objects, but just because they're in close proximity to each other, often throughout the novels, this can be meaningful.
And just one example of this, we use Lolita and Nabokov Lolita and see like both over like English and Russian translation. Actually see how does it relate with colors, because he was obsessed with colors. And then we see just like one example that's it, black and blue, and brown. You see those, and as you can see, size is what is the relevance and occurrence of these words. And as you can see, blue here, and in Russian we have two important like a sini and the голубой here. Those two occurrences are still smaller than blue. So there is a reason for us to get deeper in the close read from this qualitative and say, hey, what's happening here? And then we can get deeper and we can see, okay, in which relationship is strongest between blue and other words.
So these are all the words which occur in the same sentence with blue and close to each other, close to blue throughout the text more than once, but like
yes.
the most often.
Okay, this is it. And then, like one thing that I would like to show you is to make it nicer. This is something that is bridging with other presenters' work, and this is basically
this is a different project.
This is a different project, basically showing how all that research we can put on the visual map, how we can unify books together and kind of do same research and transition between books, between writers' styles, and see those connections. And this is like around the world in 80 days. You can see here, if you click here, you suddenly will see how a book was traveling across the world. And then you can get to each of them and basically say, actually, what was happening there, what was happening in Europe, etc. So you have like insights, and then you can eventually get a, sorry, my.
So here the system is parsing the novel, and as it's going through the novel, it locates all the place names in the novel as the heroes are traveling around the world and puts them on the map in the real time.
Yes. And that's it. So we are kind of coming from this deep into back to the reality. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sasha.
We need tools for this session. We're just moving around our computer. Thank you very much for showing us what we can do with the text or with the corpus of text.